He was a giant of the bench here for nearly 30 years. Today, people line up in the cold to say goodbye to Justice Antonin Scalia. I'm Jason Calvi. All of that story coming up.
Donald Trump versus Pope Francis. Why the Vatican believes it was just a misunderstanding. Cracking down on North Korea, the new U.S. sanctions, and the problems that remain. And the relics of a saint, how Maximilian Kolbe's life and death inspires others. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, February 19th, 2016.
And you will find rest for yourselves, for my yoke is easy and my burden light.
Justice Antonin Scalia's son, a priest, gives his late father a special blessing as his body lies in repose at the Supreme Court. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Justice Antonin Scalia spent almost 30 years at the Supreme Court. He died Saturday at a ranch in Texas, and today he is mourned. Jason Calvi was inside the Great Hall today, where Scalia's clerks stood guard as hundreds filed past the casket to honor his memory. Jason?
And Lauren, you can just take a look at the crowds. They're still very, very strong here. They describe it as a maze. These folks you see here have been waiting in line about 3 hours now. There was a delay a little bit earlier as President Obama and First Lady Michelle visited this afternoon. Just two of the many paying their last respects. Justice Scalia ruled here nearly 30 years. Supreme Court police today carry him in for his last time inside. 98 of Justice Scalia's former law clerks line the marble steps and head inside the Great Hall, where Scalia's casket is placed on the same platform used for Abraham Lincoln's coffin in 1865. Then Father Paul Scalia leads the prayers for his dad.
In your wisdom, you have called your servant Antonin out of this world. Release him from the bonds of sin and welcome him into your presence.
The 8 current justices look on one that's not just a colleague, but a friend. The first person arrived in line just before 7 this morning, a full 3 hours before the doors open to the public. And it's quite cold here in Washington today, about 24 degrees earlier this morning. North Carolina high school senior Emily Weatherspoon was first in line.
He just really stands up for what he believes in and in our Constitution, and that's really inspired me to, be firm in my beliefs.
The line wrapped a block around the court.
He's been a fantastic, very conservative spokesman.
Some in line met the justice before or saw him at Mass.
If I hadn't known who he was, you would never have known that he just seemed very humble about it.
Just such an endearing, nice, funny, witty, brilliant, judge.
We spotted several priests and brothers joining the mourners today.
We're here also hoping that our presence can be of some comfort to the family.
Justice Scalia's former clerks are standing vigil near his casket, taking 30-minute turns.
May his soul and the souls of all the faithful departed, through the mercy of God, rest in peace. And the former Scalia clerks will continue their vigil all night long until tomorrow's funeral mass, which if you take a look at this, we'll be bringing you the live coverage of that funeral mass right here on EWTN tomorrow, Saturday, 11 Eastern, right here on EWTN for the funeral mass of Justice Antonin Scalia. Lauren?
Jason, where are we on President Obama's nomination process?
Well, President Obama says he will appoint a nominee in due time, but the White House hasn't yet given a timetable for when that nominee will be announced. The White House did announce today that the president had phone calls with the top Democrat and the top Republican in the Senate to talk about Scalia's replacement. Lauren?
Jason Calvi at the Supreme Court. Thank you, Jason. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. Presidential candidates face another important test tomorrow. South Carolina hosts its Republican primary, while Nevada holds Democratic caucuses. Polls show Donald Trump lead in South Carolina, with Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio following. Ohio Governor John Cusack, who came in second in New Hampshire, says he will stay in the race regardless of Saturday's primary results, and former Florida Governor Jeb Bush brought his family on the trail to help boost his sagging poll numbers. The Vatican says Pope Francis was not targeting Donald Trump when the Pope advocated building bridges, not walls. The Reverend Federico Lombardi told Vatican Radio the Pope's comments were, quote, in no way a personal attack nor an indication on how to vote. Trump also softened his initial response to the Pope's comments.
I have a lot of respect for the Pope. I think he's got a lot of personalities, very different. He's a very different kind of a guy. And I think he's doing a very good job. He's a lot of energy. But I would say that I think he was very much misinterpreted. And I also think he was given false.
Melinda Henneberger is editor-in-chief at Roll Call. Bob Cusack, editor-in-chief at The Hill. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
What a political week we had going. I think it was a crazy week. We had Cuba, we had Scalia's death, then we had the trope. That's a new one. We could do Trump versus Pope, trope.
Right.
Let's talk about that.
You
wrote a
very
critical
Catholic
piece. Yes, it was also.
week.
It was a Catholic political week. You wrote a critical piece, somewhat critical of the Pope. Why?
Well, I don't usually criticize the Pope, but I just felt that even though I think you can take no issue with what the Pope actually had to say, I was surprised because you don't typically hear, not just this Pope, but any other, and I spoke to a lot of scholars who said the same, weighing in on someone's behavior in particular as not being Christian. Now, I hear the spokesman saying that he wasn't attacking him, and it was not a personal attack in the way we think of that, to say this is not Christian behavior. It's certainly within the Pope's purview to, in fact, it's his job description to teach us, to teach the goats and the sheep. But I was surprised to hear him take on someone in particular.
I think a lot of people were, and even Catholics too,
Right.
Linda. Now, Bob, there was a political drama surrounding Scalia's death, and it happened within hours of his passing. But right now, you know, it's really going to put swing state Republicans on the spot here. Why is that?
Well, just because they're going to have to decide, okay, are they with their party leaders, Republicans like Senator Kirk in Illinois, facing a very difficult reelection. Rob Portman in Ohio has sided with his leadership. This is a long time to sit on a nomination, a whole year, and Democrats are pouncing. The bully pulpit of the White House, President Obama, has been very active in going after Republicans. He hasn't nominated anybody yet, but when he does, then, and I think they're going to nominate somebody who is very non-controversial.
You do?
Yes.
He said that he wasn't sure that he would do that. Melinda, we are headed into the South Carolina primary right now. We've seen Jeb Bush sort of flailing on the trail, bringing in his mother, bringing in his brother, and we've seen Donald Trump continue to soar in the polls. What are your predictions, expectations for the weekend?
The polls definitely say that Trump is going to win, and I really wonder if the Pope's comments might not actually boost Trump's showing in the polls, in the vote, actually, because, you know, South Carolina has a history as not being, there are very few Catholics who live there, and some very iffy anti-Catholic history there.
That's
so
true.
I really wondered how that would affect it, but I think we're going to see, the only question is how big Trump's victory is going to be, I think.
It's going to be, right. And I wanted to mention before we go, Bob, that The Hill has just written an e-book talking about the Obama presidency and the highlights and the lowlights. Is that right?
Basically what he accomplished, what he did, and we went back to sources and said, tell us stories that have never been told before. So it's on the Apple Store now, it was out last week, and it took a couple months to put together, so we're proud of it.
Great, we'll take a look at it. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Melinda Henneberger, Bob Cusack. 41 people are dead after American warplanes struck multiple targets in Libya, including an Islamic training camp. Senior ISIS operative accused of 2 attacks in Tunisia last year may be among the dead. A U.S. official says the strike came ahead of possible planned terror attack in Europe or somewhere else outside the North African nation. President Obama signs off on new, tough sanctions against North Korea. It comes weeks after the country's regime launched several nuclear and missile tests. Wyatt Goolsby reports.
Lauren, this new round of sanctions is one area where both political parties seemingly agree. Congress overwhelmingly passed the measure. It freezes the assets of anyone doing business related to nuclear weapons or anyone suspected of being involved in human rights abuses in North Korea. The U.S. and its allies are denouncing Kim Jong-un's regime. The new sanctions are aimed at cutting off money North Korea needs to develop miniaturized nuclear warheads. All eyes have been on the country since they launched a long-range missile on February 7th. They claim it's an observation satellite. North Korea has broadcast video and images of their leader visiting the testing site and awarding the scientists who worked on the launch. But President Obama says he does not believe the rocket launch is intended for peaceful purposes. Neither do the South Koreans, who held an emergency security meeting Thursday after their spy network told them to be ready for potential terror and cyber terror attacks from their neighbors to the north. China, on the other hand, is against the sanctions. Today, their foreign ministry spokesman urged caution, saying you can't resolve hotspot issues through simple sanctions or pressuring.
I think there can be continued dialogue with China in respect of the danger that is presented to the Chinese people.
Michael Kirby, who chaired a UN commission looking into North Korea's human rights violations in 2014, spoke in Washington. He says the regime's crimes against its citizens are just as dangerous as its testing of nuclear weapons. He says one possible solution is to use technology to get messages into the country in support of the North Korean people.
Accountability will come. There will be a place in the sun after the end of the terrors of the present moments.
The U.S. and China are negotiating over a UN Security Council resolution on new sanctions, but nothing there is set in stone. Some analysts say North Korea's recent moves are thanks to Kim Jong-un's trying to appear powerful before his party's Congress in May. Lauren?
Wyatt Goolsby, thank you. An appeals court has ruled against EWTN's case against the government's health insurance mandate. Obamacare requires employer-sponsored health plans to provide coverage for contraception, sterilizations, and abortion-inducing drugs. Joining us now is EWTN's chairman and CEO, Michael Warsaw. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Lauren.
Tell me how EWTN sees this decision as affecting its freedom of religious expression.
Well, essentially what the appeals court said yesterday in its decision is that it admitted that EWTN has a sincerely held religious belief that these procedures are considered immoral, but that belief was not compelling enough, not serious enough or substantial enough to outweigh the government's interest in forcing EWTN to use its health care plan to provide these services that we would consider objectionable.
So what does that mean? Does that mean that if it would stand, if this decision would stand and you wouldn't decide to do anything about it, does that mean that EWTN signs a piece of paper and that's that?
Well, one of the arguments the government's made in our case and so many of the other cases is that it's simply signing a piece of paper, and that's false. By signing this piece of paper, EWTN and other plaintiffs would be giving the government permission to essentially hijack or take over our own health care plan, our self-funded health care plan, and to use that plan to provide these services that we find morally objectionable through our own plan. The government wants to say, and this court decision yesterday bought into this idea, that it's simply signing the form and there's no consequence of that. That's simply false.
Tell me what this means if you go forward and say, take this to the Supreme Court level.
Well, we're not sure what our legal route will be. It could either be an appeal to the Supreme Court directly or to ask for a full hearing by the full panel of judges of the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. It's very complicated right now by the Justice Scalia vacancy on the court and what might happen with that. So we're weighing our options right now as to what our next step would be in this process.
Thank you very much for joining us, Chairman and CEO Michael Warsaw. Coming up, clarifying the Pope's comments on contraception, how the spread of the Zika virus is causing new questions, and remembering Harper Lee, what her book means to American culture. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Republicans say the fastest way for President Obama to get money to combat the Zika virus is to tap leftover funding from the fight against Ebola. The president is asking Congress for $1.8 billion to help stop the spread of the virus. The FDA has new guidelines for keeping the Zika virus out of the U.S. blood supply. The agency is asking people who recently traveled to affected countries to wait 4 weeks before donating blood. This also applies to their partners. And the Vatican wants to clarify the Church's teaching on contraception, following the Pope's comments about the Zika virus. The Vatican spokesman said abortion is totally unacceptable, but there are special situations where contraception is allowed. Dr. Chad Pecknold, professor of theology at the Catholic University of America, joins us. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Did Pope Francis say contraception is okay to use?
Well, he didn't. The comments from the Vatican today are a bit confusing, but the Pope was asked whether abortion and avoiding pregnancy was licit as responses to the Zika virus. And the Pope immediately said abortion's a crime. He likened it to a mafia hit. He likened it to an assassination attempt. So he really reiterated that abortion is unacceptable, as you say. But he said that avoiding pregnancy was not an intrinsic absolute evil.
But then he brought up the case of Blessed Paul VI, who said that nuns in Africa who were afraid of being raped could use contraception. Why did he bring that up?
Yeah, well, he brought it up, I think, to find an exception where the church is thinking about emergency situations. It's a little bit of a difficult analogy, though, because the Belgian Congo nuns are allowed to take contraceptions not to prevent a life, but as self-defense, because in order for a sexual act to be a sexual act, it has to be voluntary, and rape isn't voluntary, it's an act of violence. And so the church allows contraception for self-defense in that case.
I understand. He was also asked about communion for divorced and remarried Catholics. What can we take away from his response?
Well, he gave us a lot of interesting clues for what's coming up in his apostolic exhortation on the family. And one clue he gave us is that he himself has closed the door to communion for the divorced and civilly remarried. So for all of our attempts to try to figure out, is the Pope, going to change church teaching here, it seems like he's pulling a Paul VI and allowing a debate, but then reaffirming church teaching.
Right. All right, Dr. Chad Pecknold, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Lauren.
Up next, a cut beard, how St. Maximilian Kolbe's story continues to motivate others. And a faith-based movie, actor Joseph Fiennes gives us a sneak peek. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Lauren Ashburn. The author of one of the most famous books in the world has died. Harper Lee wrote To Kill a Mockingbird in 1960. It's the story of a lawyer defending a black man wrongly accused of raping a white woman. A 1991 study by the Library of Congress ranked the novel second only to the Bible, and Lee was surprised it became such a success. Actor Gregory Peck won an Oscar for his portrayal of the lawyer in the movie version. Harper Lee, dead today at the age of 89. The largest U.S. tour of St. Maximilian Kolbe's relics stops in Washington, D.C. this week. As Catherine Szeltner reports, the Polish priest still calls the faithful to a greater witness.
People sometimes are intimidated by relics. What are they?
Catholic University students find out firsthand as St. Maximilian Kolbe's first-class relics are venerated at a campus chapel this week.
You could walk through the dining halls and you could hear kind of conversations about relics and saints, and it's really taking the campus by storm.
The relics are strands of Kolbe's famous beard, thanks to a Franciscan barber.
The barber saved those hairs from his beard. Those are the only first-class relics that we have of Maximilian because, of course, after his death, he was incinerated.
The relics tour marks 75 years since the Polish priest offered his life in place of another man at the Auschwitz Nazi concentration camp.
St. John Paul II called Maximilian Kolbe a martyr of charity for giving the ultimate sacrifice at Auschwitz.
Dr. Suzanne Brown Fleming researches Holocaust victims, including Kolbe, at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum.
He was put in a standing cell, in a starvation cell for 2 weeks in Auschwitz, and still did not succumb, and in fact was murdered by phenol injection.
Holocaust Archive shed some light on Kolbe's time at Auschwitz.
He was diagnosed with bronchitis. You can see his soup bowl, that all prisoners had a red tin soup bowl, that if anyone stole your soup bowl, that was very dangerous because then you would starve.
But Catholic University's chaplain says there's one part of this saint we should all study.
I think what's important is that we have this man who was focused on how do I evangelize, how do I bring the message of the gospel to people around the world.
Catherine Szeltner, EWTN News Nightly.
In the wake of Justice Antonin Scalia's death, pro-lifers are looking to the future, wondering what impact it will have on the court. One big question, how will the rights of women and the preborn be impacted? Matt Bowman is senior counsel at Alliance Defending Freedom. Serrin Foster is president of Feminists for Life. Thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Matt, from a legal standpoint, how big of a loss is Justice Scalia's death?
Well, Justice Scalia was not only a great Christian man and a witness to our Constitution, but he was the fifth vote in crucial cases, including abortion cases. He was the vote that decided that the states and the federal government are allowed to ban partial birth abortion. And that vote could flip if the seat that he sat in was replaced by someone who disagreed.
Right. Serrin, the two of you were both on a panel at Georgetown Law talking about the legal rights of pregnant women, and your focus helps women choose life. Tell us what this is going to mean for you and your organization.
Well, first of all, I think it's important for us to listen to women and find out why they're having abortions, who's at highest risk, and they include the poorest in this country, women who already have children, college-age women, young working women, and minority women are disproportionately at risk, those who have suffered from domestic violence, et cetera. So for Feminists for Life, our work is to systematically eliminate the reasons that drive women to abortion so that we make abortion unthinkable.
The Supreme Court is also scheduled to take up the Texas abortion case, Matt. What will they be examining in this case? Do you think that a favorable ruling can come down without Justice Scalia?
Well, the issue in this case is whether a woman can feel safe when she goes to have a surgery, or whether abortionists can be allowed to not have to comply with the same rules that other doctors comply with. Now, we can't know what the court's going to do with this case. We can say, though, that even Roe versus Wade itself, one of the most controversial cases in court history, was held over because of vacancies on the court. And there are procedural mechanisms that the court could use to wait until January if the people are allowed to weigh in on the empty seat here this November.
Without legal protections in place, what can be done to protect women and help them choose life?
Well, one of the prime problems we have is coercion, coerced abortions. And so looking at those who would threaten women into an abortion by threats to withhold child support is something we can do now. We can also help women complete their college education because financial issues are not one of the top reasons why women are driven to abortion. We can connect them to pregnancy resource centers now to help them go through the maze of social services that are available publicly and privately so that they do not feel forced to have an abortion. We can give women much better choices. Women deserve better, and their kids deserve life.
Thank you very much, Serrin Foster, president of Feminists for Life, Matt Bowman, senior counsel at Alliance Defending Freedom.
Thank you.
A new faith-based film is hitting theaters this weekend.
When the Messiah comes, Rome will be nothing!
Until then.
Risen stars Joseph Fiennes as Clavius, a Roman soldier who is helping Pontius Pilate before experiencing a change of heart and becoming a believer. Fiennes sat down with EWTN's Mary Shovlin to discuss the new film.
The big takeaway is also the fact that most movies end up with the final moment being the crucifixion, and here we pick up with the crucifixion, or take off with the crucifixion, and we go into the resurrection and the ascension. So in many ways, there's a wonderful sense that the movie is risen and is about the ascension, but it's uplifting as well. It leaves us on a great positive note, and you don't ordinarily see that in films about Christ.
Early reviews for Risen are mixed. Fiennes says it's a very honest film that is respectful of Scripture. That does it for us this evening. For the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Lauren Ashburn. Good night, and God bless.